Okay, so tonight's discussion or workshop or webinar is about the emotional causes of health symptoms, and I chose 3 of my favorite people to talk about their concepts about the emotional cause of ill health, and a little bit we're not going to get super technical, but we are going to get a little technical because it's important to understand how our emotions affect our physical body and how often, like what percentage that happens and all that stuff. And so it's important to go into a little bit of background with these 3 topics. So we're going to be discussing Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief. We're going to talk about Carolyn Mace and why people don't heal, and we're going to talk about Dr. Hammer's German New Medicine. But instead of going into, well, you'll understand as we go, but instead of going too specifically or detailed, I mean, each one of those can be very long subjects, okay? So I picked what I like about them as far as, covering how this happens, how we're affected by the emotional causes. So that's the first part to really understand, is that most, at least some people think, between 90 and 95% of all physical problems started in the mind and the brain. And so to get you to that place, I thought it was important to go into, some of these specific concepts. And depending on how tonight goes, this may end up being a part 2 next month. We'll see. And it depends on how many comments and questions you have. I am going to suggest for those on tonight live, this will be on YouTube soon as a recording. So just to let you know, in case you start asking personal health questions, which I encourage. But since this will be on YouTube, just beware that whatever you ask won't be private because it will be on YouTube. But I do encourage you to ask questions at the end or during the discussion in case there's something that you want to know about yourself personally, and that's the advantage of watching this live, is that you can do that. The recorded version, obviously, people don't have that opportunity. So as we go, if you think of something that is like an aha moment, it would be great to jot it down, and then you can either raise your hand by using the little raise hand symbol next to your name, if you can see the GoToWebinar sidebar, or you can type a question in the question box. If you just open the question box, you can type a question and it will come to me. I'll read your question and then answer your question. I see a few people on tonight that are not, as far as I know, been on webinars before, my webinars, and so I'm happy that you're on tonight. This is a great subject. Also, in October, I'm actually teaching a 5-day class that goes into a lot of detail about this subject, way more than I can go into a 2-hour webinar. So if this piques your interest and you want to take the live class, then at the end of the thing, end of the presentation, I'll be giving you information on how to do that, what the dates are, and stuff like that. If you're on my mailing list, you already have gotten information about that October class. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. A little bit of background about myself having to do with emotional work. I was fortunate enough when I first got into natural health. A little bit of background is I had lupus, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, adult onset asthma, shingles, acid reflux, like GERD basically, and a ton of allergies. And I'm a huge Hannah Kroger fan, but before I even went to Peaceful Mental Retreat in Boulder, I had the opportunity to take a 17-day course in neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, including timeline therapy, and Reiki. And this really opened my eyes, not the Reiki so much, but the NLP and the hypnosis really opened my eyes, because one minute I have this adult onset asthma that I'm taking 5 inhalers for, 4 that I had to take every day, and 1 kind of emergency one to keep me alive. I was so asthmatic that I literally couldn't put my hands over my head. And a lot of people, it's hard to believe now because I'm not like that at all, but I'm telling you, in literally 8 minutes, I went from that condition with these 5 prescriptions to no asthma whatsoever. And had it not happened to me, where this was released by, number 1, identifying the underlying cause and when it started, and then clearing it, if I had not seen this for myself, on myself, I honestly wouldn't have believed it. I don't know that I could believe it. And that was like the first little, what? Like, I'd been in the medical system. I'd been during Western medicine. I was on, 9 medications a day, every day. Then I was on over-the-counter stuff like Tylenol PM and Claritin and stuff like that. And if you would have told me I could have got off all those medications in 12 months' time, I don't know if I even would have believed you back then. So I know where people are because I've been there, and it's a hard concept to say. And what I don't want you to hear is it's in your mind. It's not in your mind like your psychosomatic. It's actually because of your mind and these emotional triggers and conflicts and life experiences that most time have us kind of wound up and have us, have these little traumas that then manifest into physical symptoms in the body. So after that course, I've taken a ton of courses having to do with emotional health. Every clearing technique that I know of, I've taken. I've taken lots of, extracurricular stuff that has to do with mind-body connection. I've read everything by Greg Braden, Bruce Lipton, Carolyn Mace, Judith Orloff. Those are some of my favorites. But also Deepak and, just like everyone that has an opinion, Lynn Taggart. I'm just trying to think of some of the key people. Anyway, anything I can get my hands on, I've read about psychology and the physical body. Louise Hay is a lot of people's early introduction into affirmations and which parts of the body are connected to which emotions. I mean, a lot of people, you probably all have heard of her. She's a good first base on this concept tonight. I'm going to go past that because I think that's pretty simplistic for most of the people that are probably tuning in. But that is a good place to go maybe back to if necessary. So Betty is saying, I have one person who says she may not have sound. Hold on one second. Lynn, can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
You can hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so Betty, she says she doesn't have sound. So either I would check your speaker. It doesn't look like you're dialed in because your little headphone or thing here is gray. So I'd either hang up the phone or dial in. There's an audio button that has the audio instructions, and it has, I have it, I'll read this out to you if you can just write this down because otherwise I got to get moving here. You can either get on through an audio set on a microphone headset, or you can dial in on a telephone or cell phone. The phone number to dial into is 1-631-992-3221. So again, 1-631-992-3221. Oh, she says she doesn't have sound. That's not really helping, right? So let me put this in the chat for everybody. 631. I'm like, okay, duh. Sorry, everybody. Let me just respond to her so she can get sound, hopefully. Okay. So hopefully she can get sound there. All right, so let's keep going. Okay. So anyway, that's a little bit of background, and these are what we're going to cover tonight. The German New Medicine, Bruce Lipton, Biology of Belief, and Carolyn Mace, Why People Don't Heal, which is really the core of what I talk the most about to my clients, these three basic concepts, even though they're not basic. So let's start with Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief. All of this is referenced throughout the presentation, plus you can find tons of free stuff on YouTube and on various websites about these three people. So Bruce Lipton, the Biology of Belief, is a groundbreaking work in the field of new biology. Bruce Lipton, PhD, is a former medical school professor and research scientist. His experiments and those of other leading-edge scientists have examined in great detail the mechanisms by which cells receive and process information. The implications of this research radically change our understanding of life. It shows that genes and DNA do not control our biology, but instead DNA is controlled by signals from outside the cell, including the energetic messages emanating from our positive and negative thoughts. So this is a new concept. Prior to the Genome Project, they thought that DNA controlled us. They thought genetics controlled us. They thought that our DNA predisposed us to our issues of, depression or type 2 diabetes or gout or kidney disease or whatever. Well, what happened, if you guys don't know, remember how there was this big thing, in front page of Time magazine, the Genome Project, and all these controversies between religious organizations messing with DNA and all that stuff, and then it just went nowhere. And then you never heard about it again. Like they were talking about cloning people. That was what the big controversy was. Well, what happened was they figured out when they set up this huge facility that they couldn't replicate DNA because it kept changing. And if DNA is changing, that means it wasn't what they thought it was in the first place. So if DNA can change, then the next question became, why can it change? If it's these strands that are supposed to hold our information of who we are, who we become, what illnesses we have, what color hair we have, how can that change? And so that was a big question, and that's where Bruce Lipton kind of got involved in this. Well, he was already involved in biology as a research scientist, but they realized that the human body had basically the same DNA combinations as a worm, and that's not what they thought before. And so if we have the same number of DNA strands and the same combinations as a worm, then that's pretty interesting to me. And so obviously we have a lot more going on than a worm, like a earthworm, but that's how the DNA came out. Then they realized that the researchers themselves and the person where the DNA came from could influence the DNA, the impulses, and what happened to the DNA under a microscope. And so that became a huge thing. That did not make it on the front of Time magazine, because can you imagine if that made it on the front of Time magazine? That actually gives us some control over our health. That gives us some responsibility, and it has a lot to do against what the common belief is in Western medicine. But it never was on the front page of any magazine. So this right here is a chart that is the power of your amazing brain. So it says the conscious mind controls our brain only 5% of the day. The subconscious mind has a hold of our thoughts 95% of the time. It's the subconscious brain that is always listening and paying attention to what we're doing, what we're thinking, what's in the background, what's in the environment. It's the perceived or unperceived threats. It's the worry about money. It's how the bills are going to get paid, even if someone's not consciously, actively in the moment thinking about them. It's also in the subconscious mind where we hold the old conflicts, the traumas, and the memories. The brain is 66.67% fat. Your brain is 2/3 fat. Myelin, the protective sheath covering your neurons, is 70% fat. Eating fatty fish, green leafy vegetables, olive oil, avocados, chia seeds, flax seeds, and nuts replenish your neurons and brain cells. Also, it doesn't say it here because I got this from another website, is lecithin. Hannah Kroger said lecithin is the most nourishing thing to the brain to help with adrenal fatigue, brain fatigue, the myelin sheath of that protective sheath of the myelin cord, which is like your electrical wires in the body, so basically your neurological system, and good for conditions such as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and things like that. It says loss of fatty acids, EPA, and DHA are linked to depression, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. Again, lecithin is another good option. Thoughts are real. Your thoughts cause biological and physiological effect. Your body responds to mental input as if it were physically real. So let me just start there for a minute. You know how people that worry all the time, and some people don't worry. Some people who worry think everybody worry. Well, they don't. The people who have just general fear, like an unknown fear, like unknown threat, like they're always worried about something, but it's not just worry, it's like anxiety, fear, or panic. Or if a person is having some repetitive thought process, the body perceives it as real even if it isn't. So if a person is in fear all the time about anything, the body is going to be in fight or flight mode. It's going to be in survival mode, which is a whole set of symptoms related to fight or flight. And there might not be any real threat. Maybe the threat was 25 years ago, but the body never got the message that the threat is over. So it's still living in fight or flight or parasympathetic dominant. And so that's super important to understand, because as long as the person's not, a healthy person is in parasympathetic and like in between parasympathetic and sympathetic, going back and forth all the time, based on if they're awake, they're asleep, how much stress they have during the day. That's a normal response, but it's not normal to stay in parasympathetic dominance for 20 years because of fear or perceived threats. And so all this is physically real to the body, and the body doesn't know the difference between being chased by a wild animal or just fears that are unknown, or maybe because of child abuse or because of car impact that the body is still responding to, and a very long time ago. Listen to music. Studies have proven that listening to music strengthens the brain and literally changes the structure. I would say listen to good music. Go to Dr. Emoto's work on that, because different kinds of music can definitely affect the brain differently. And boost your brain power with meditation. It's proven to increase IQ, relieve stress, and promote higher learning levels. And the last piece is it says you have 70,000 thoughts per day. So that brain is constantly firing, neurons are constantly firing, and it looks like that little light blue part where it looks like a little streak of lightning. That's like a thought process, and that's just firing all the time. If you've ever seen any videos of how the brain works inside, they're pretty cool. Lipton argues that genes cannot control life because they cannot turn themselves on or off. That is done by signals from the cellular environment. Epigenetics, or the study of the molecular mechanisms by which the environment controls gene activity, is today one of the most active areas of scientific research. Environmental influences, including nutrition, stress, and emotions, can modify genes without changing their basic blueprint, meaning like your hair color. And these modifications can be passed on to future generations. DNA makes up only half of the content of chromosomes. The other half consists of regulatory proteins, which are turning out to play as crucial a role in heredity as DNA. Studies of protein synthesis reveal that epigenetic factors can create 2,000 or more variations of proteins from the same gene blueprint. Basically what he's saying is regulatory proteins are the triggers. The DNA is holding information, but that can be changed, and once it's changed based on the feelings, the environmental thought processes, the limiting beliefs, that's how it can be carried on to future generations. Evidence for the role of epigenetic mechanisms has become so compelling that some scientists have started speaking favorably again of Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck, the much-scorned evolutionist who believed that traits acquired as a result of environmental influence could sometimes be passed on to offspring. The genome is certainly turning out to be far more fluid and responsive to the environment than previously supposed. It's clear that DNA does not control biology, and that information can be transmitted to descendants in ways other than through the base sequence of DNA, which means like informationally, energetically, learned behaviors, the stuff I just said. We now know that genes are transferred between members of the same species and of different species. This highlights the dangers of genetic engineering. Tinkering with the genes of a tomato, for example, could alter the entire biosphere in unforeseen ways. One study has shown that when humans digest genetically modified foods or GMO foods, the artificially created genes transfer into and alter the beneficial bacteria in the intestine. Similarly, gene transfer among genetically engineered agricultural crops and surrounding native species has given rise to highly resistant superweeds. As Lipton says, scientists are messing around with our genes and environment without understanding how interconnected everything is. And from my own perspective as a naturopath, I work with humans and pets. I work with domestic animals from health scans and consultations. And I have seen myself for very many years, like 18 years, that dogs and cats specifically can take on their owner's issues. Our DNA is not the same. We're different types of mammals, but I've seen over and over where a person who has blood sugar issues will have 3 or 4 dogs in a row that have eventually diagnosed with diabetes. I've seen childhood leukemia and every dog get diagnosed with cancer even as early as a dog being 6 months old. So we can't, I mean, this is what this means is the dog has not any DNA compared to the human, and not even, it would be the same as a non-relative, but it's still influenced because of information and this kind of entanglement between the dog and its owner, or dog and someone and one of the family members, usually who the dog is most connected with. So this is like a little bit of a diagram. This goes into a little bit more detail, but there's the cell wall and there's the chromosome in the middle of the thing that looks like an X. And this is where they thought that this little X, the chromosomes, was where all the DNA strands were that held the information of basically our whole life, like this pre-breast cancer testing and stuff like that, this predisposition. But that's one thing to think about. If there isn't a predisposition, then what good is the pre-breast cancer screening? Or what good are certain tests or DNA type tests when we can change them? So that's something to think about. I would say, based on what I know, is if someone came back positive with a breast cancer test for DNA predisposition, if they had a strong belief that they're very likely to get cancer, because breast cancer, because maybe their mom and their grandma did. And so that's one way to look at it. If someone did not have any belief that they would get cancer, then they would probably come back testing negative for that DNA testing for cancer. So that's one way to look at how that works. But food, water, sound, color, emotions, feelings, thoughts, beliefs, frequencies, and then even in the cosmic energy, planets, stars, crystals, essences, and all this other stuff, all have an impact environmentally to that DNA strand. You know, I think in the child webinar I did, I talked about kids who are earth sensitive. You know, if they're sensitive to earthquakes and volcanoes, so that would be something like that would be cosmic energy or nature or elementals. Some people have like a reaction to gold or silver, like they can't wear certain jewelry. Some people have solar flare sensitivity. So all of this is part of our makeup, but all of these have an influence on our DNA, and the output is what our physical symptoms are that manifest. Although cells appear to be anatomically simple, they display incredible complexity and power and employ technologies that scientists have barely begun to understand. Like humans, single cells analyze thousands of stimuli from the microenvironment they inhabit and select appropriate behavioral responses to ensure their survival. They are even capable of altering their own genes. This is to survive. And we're going to get a little bit more into this when we talk about Dr. Hammer, because he's all over this as far as very detailed and specific. But if you think about this in nature, this would be, you know, basically survival of the fittest, but it's also how over hundreds and thousands of years animals and humans have adapted to their environment. Like giraffes have the long neck so they can eat the certain leaves of the trees in Africa. You know, other animals have different mechanisms like that to ensure their survival. And so it may not happen in one generation, it may happen over time, but it's also changing because of their environment. I'm sure if someone looked at, you know, dinosaurs compared to what we have now, that was also basically an adaptability issue over what's happened over, you know, a long period of time. Like the woolly mammoth versus today's elephant, for instance. The cell's operations are therefore primarily molded by its interaction with the environment, not by its genetic code. Genes cannot pre-program a cell or an organism's life because cell survival depends on the ability to dynamically adjust to an ever-changing environment. In Lipton's view, the membrane's function of interacting intelligently with the environment to produce behavior makes it the true brain of the cell. If the membrane is destroyed, the cell dies. If multicellular organisms' key functions in the membrane are taken over by specialized tissues and organs, such as the nervous system, lungs, muscles, etc. Millions of people attribute failing health not to a combination of mental, physical, and emotional causes, but simply to the inadequacies of their body's biochemical mechanics. Increasingly, the first choice in dealing with unruly children, for example, is to medicate them to correct their chemical imbalances rather than grappling with what is truly going on in their bodies and minds. Although scientists have linked lots of genes to lots of different diseases and traits, they have rarely found that one gene causes a particular disease or trait. Lipton points out that the diseases that are today's scourges, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer, are not the result of a single gene, but of complex interactions among multiple genes and environmental factors. Only 5% of cancer and cardiovascular patients can attribute their disease to heredity. And I've heard lectures by him where he's saying that he's just throwing in 5%, like they're not even sure it's 5%. It could be less than 5%. It's just saying, okay, maybe 5% is possible, but that's not even been proven. So this is another kind of example here. This doesn't make a lot of sense maybe, but the one on the left is this strand, these protein strands in the body. And then once a particular external signal is received, like anxiety or a car wreck or, worried if the person's going to get food or not, then the DNA strand and the proteins change form. So this is just actually a visual of it actually changing. So there's movement where this used to be considered more stagnant. Movements generated by shape change create biological behavior. So when the DNA strands change, our health changes, but it's because of an external signal. Now you see there below that he put remove signal. It is possible that this can be corrected with the right information, but that's where actually it's removing the signal, healing, forgiveness, whatever, but that's actually where the signal is removed from the equation. Now this is a picture from a video, but I saw when I was getting ready for this webinar that there's, I think at least every lecture I've seen of him is on YouTube, and they're, depending on which one you watch, they're between 1 and 2 hours long. And he does get very technical in those presentations, but I think they're very, very good for really a comprehensive understanding of his background and how he came up with this information. He argues that drugs and surgery are powerful tools when not overused, but the notion of simple drug fixes is fundamentally flawed. Every time a drug is introduced into the body to correct function A, it inevitably throws off function B, C, and D. That's why pharmaceutical drugs come with information sheets listing numerous side effects ranging from irritating to deadly. People who take over-the-counter antihistamines, for example, may experience allergy relief, but also the side effect of feeling drowsy. Synthetic hormone replacement therapy has been shown to have disturbing side effects that result in cardiovascular disease and neural dysfunctions such as strokes. According to a recent study, iatrogenic illness, meaning doctor-induced illness resulting from medical treatment, is a leading cause of death in the U.S., and adverse reactions to prescription drugs are responsible for more than 300,000 deaths a year. Now, I'm just going to say this, if there was an herb that had these potential side effects, or even if they've had 10 deaths, they're going to be pulled from the market forever, like chaparral is one example. So this is just something to think about. A lot of people, in fact, I have this case right now I'm working with where, this daughter of this lady is on a lot of, not on a lot of meds, but let's say some meds, and I just recommended a few simple herbs, and she is just questioning every single aspect of the herbs, efficacy, safety, and everything. But this always makes me kind of laugh because I'm sure she didn't do this to the pharmaceuticals. And the inserts are in there, what they cause, and people just take them willy-nilly, like, oh, no big deal, the doctor says to take this. But if you recommend an herb, they'll go, oh, well, are you sure? I don't know, like, if it's safe. And I'm like, really? So anyway, one thing that we have to think about is also what the underlying cause of the physical problem is, because the simple drug fix is also always a Band-Aid. It's not ever going to fix the actual problem. I mean, if you think about it, what drug actually fixes the problem? All drugs by nature are meant to be on them. Well, I take that back. Let's say an antibiotic is meant to fix a short-term problem, but I'm talking about for high blood pressure, kidney disorders, tamoxifen after breast cancer, diabetes drugs like metformin, allergy meds. I mean, they're never resolving the issue. They're just meant to be taking them forever, so people become dependent on them. We've been programmed by pharmaceutical corporations to become a nation of prescription drug-popping junkies with tragic results. Using prescription drugs to silence a body symptom enables us to ignore personal involvement we may have with the onset of those symptoms. Research suggests that our hypervigilant lifestyle has a severe impact on the health of our bodies. Almost every major illness is linked to chronic stress, and the inhibition of neuronal growth by stress hormones can lead to depression. And just one thing on the page numbers, this is referencing the book Biology of Belief. So that's what the page number is referencing. Also, it's a lot easier, let me just tell you this also from a therapeutic approach, it's a lot easier when someone has a recent condition. Like, I can think of a lot of examples, but I'll tell you a college kid story. I have a college age client that's been my client since she was like 6, and she's a freshman in college now. But she went off to college and she started getting these weird but pretty extreme skin problems all over her legs, and to the point she couldn't wear shorts at all or skirts. She really wanted to cover them because she was embarrassed. And this was in later you'll find, but skin issues are usually related to some type of separation conflict. Well, when she went to college, you know, she went out of the city, away from her parents. She never lived alone before. She left her friends from high school, and there was a thing with a boyfriend. And so, you know, with her, it was pretty easy to figure out because that she'd had these symptoms for a few months before they thought to call me, and we were able to resolve it in one appointment. And the symptoms were completely gone because it was very easy to identify with her when this started and what was going on in her life that related to separation. Those are super easy to resolve. What's not easy is when the person has had something 20 or 30 years and they have no idea what was going on 20 years ago when the symptoms started. And the other one that's very hard to figure out, honestly, is the ones that happen in childhood where the people have no recollection of their childhood, where they've basically blocked everything. Those are very hard to resolve because we can't identify them. But, you know, the sooner, right where it says right here, the personal involvement we have with the onset of those symptoms is if we cannot look at our symptoms as soon as they come up and make the connection in our brain of what is behind this, we can have good success in not becoming a chronic problem. That's super important to remember. This is a quote, we can control our lives by controlling our perceptions. So this is a picture of Bruce Lipton. So this is a great quote because our realities are based on perceptions. The same thing can happen to 10 different people, and depending on their perception of the event depends on if it really becomes a physical issue or not. So let's say someone's boyfriend cheats on them, but they're just like, well, you know what? He's not right for me. He's obviously a loser. Cheaters never change. Good riddance. Glad I know now, better than later, and they move on. That person may not even have any physical ailment that comes from that cheating experience. But if the next person has that same experience and they're crying for like 3 months and talking about it for 10 years, and they can't get over it, and they think everyone in the world is going to cheat on them from that point forward, they're going to have a physical manifestation, I can promise you, of issues related to the heart, the skin, digestive issues, because of how they perceive that event and how they dwell on it and how intensely they dwell on it. And I know that this might be hard to understand, but cheating is so common in so many people's stories, but they can manifest into many, many, many different symptoms with different various things, everything from genital type cancers or breast cancer to skin issues. And a lot of that is determined by the person and forgiveness and how well they get over it and when they get over it and how long it takes. And it's not to say we can walk around like you have no feelings and don't care, but it's kind of like once we kind of stay stuck in that story and that victimhood and that whatever happened, then that kind of determines where this is headed in the body. We're going to get to Carolyn Mace next, but one thing she said is, you know, tell your story 3 times, and then that's it. I mean, if you feel like you need to keep sharing that story 3 times, and then make yourself accountable not to talk about it anymore, because then it becomes your story, and your story is driving your physical ailments and symptoms. The well-known placebo effect dramatically demonstrates the healing power of the mind. Fake drugs often prove just as effective as genuine chemical cocktails, provided patients believe they are receiving the real thing. The placebo effect has proved powerful in treating various diseases, including asthma and Parkinson's. In a study of severely depressed patients, 50% of those taking drugs improved, but so did 32% of those taking a placebo. In more than half the clinical trials for the 6 leading antidepressants, the drugs did not outperform placebo sugar pills. Interestingly, antidepressants have performed better and better in clinical trials over the years, suggesting that slick marketing has produced a placebo effect, demonstrating that beliefs are contagious. In a study of patients with severe knee pain, those who received surgery improved, but those in the placebo group, incisions were made in their knees and then sewed up, improved just as much. Isn't that interesting? They had fake surgery and they still improved because they thought they had surgery. That's pretty crazy. The opposite of the placebo effect is the nocebo effect, negative thinking, including the hope-deflating messages that physicians sometimes convey to their patients, can damage health. For instance, a man suffering from cancer of the esophagus, a condition considered at the time to be 100% fatal, died a few weeks after his diagnosis, yet an autopsy found that there was not enough cancer in his body to kill him. Our positive and negative beliefs impact not only our health, but every aspect of our lives. In 1952, Dr. Albert Mason, a British physician, used hypnosis to successfully treat a severe case of warts, which covered most of a 15-year-old boy's body. Mason was later shocked to learn that the boy was not in fact suffering from warts, but from a lethal genetic disease called congenital ichthyosis. This shows that the mind can even override genetic programming. Mason tried to cure a number of other ichthyosis patients, but never with the same success. He attributed this to his own irrepressible doubts about the ability of hypnosis to cure this genetic condition, in contrast to simple warts. So his belief when he thought it was warts and the 15-year-old belief that he could do it was more important or bigger factor than once he knew that he's dealing with a near fatal disease or a possibly lethal genetic disease. Another Bruce Lipton quote, "I'm free to change how I respond to the world, so as I change the way I see the world. I change my genetic expression. We are not victims of our genes. We are masters of our genetics." I like that one. According to germ theory, bacteria and viruses are the cause of disease. This theory was developed in the 19th century and was initially very controversial. One critic was so convinced it was wrong that he brazenly gulped down a glass of water laced with basically cholera, the bacteria thought to cause cholera. Astonishingly, the man's belief was so strong that he was completely unaffected by the virulent pathogen. Another demonstration of mind over matter is firewalking. Thousands of people have managed to walk across hot coals, while those who waver in their beliefs suffer burns. There are also many unexplained cases of terminal cancer patients recovering their lives through spontaneous remissions. And this germ theory, there was a whole lot of controversy between Pasteur and Beecham. Pasteur's theory was what was embraced, I guess, which is why we have pasteurized milk. But Beecham questioned that theory back, that's what he's talking about, the 19th century. Harry Lindler was a great philosopher that has a lot to say about the germ theory, which many people believe now is not actually true, which you'll hear more about with Homer. Lipton says that thoughts directly influence how the physical brain controls the body's physiology. Thought energy can activate or inhibit the cell's function producing proteins. The fact is that harnessing the power of your mind can be more effective than the drugs you have been programmed to believe you need. He stresses that this requires not just positive thinking, but also eliminating the habitually negative and self-sabotaging thought patterns of the subconscious mind. Here's another quote, "The moment you change your perception is the moment you rewrite the chemistry of your body." And having to do with that, there was some studies done in the book, Intention Experiment, where they did take blood from different scenarios like schizophrenics who, under different personalities of their schizophrenia, had completely different blood chemistry. Same body, same human, different blood chemistry based on their personality at the time. How would that be possible if this statement isn't true? Lipton does, however, go one step further, saying that just as a television set picks up broadcasts transmitted through the air, so our self-identity is generated by information present in the external environment, which is downloaded by our cell's receptors. He sees evidence that an individual's broadcast or self is still present even after death in the fact that patients who have received organ transplants sometimes report behavioral and psychological changes. For instance, one conservative, health-conscious American was astonished when she developed a taste for beer, chicken nuggets, and motorcycles after her heart-lung transplant. Her donor turned out to be a young motorcycle enthusiast who loved chicken nuggets and beer. In another case, a young girl began having nightmares of murder after her heart transplant, and her dreams were so vivid they led to the capture of the murderer who killed her donor. Pretty interesting stuff. Lipton offers the following explanation. The transplanted organs still bear the original identity receptors of the donor and are apparently still downloading that same environmental information. Even though the body of the person who donated the organs is dead, their broadcast is still on. And this obviously can have nothing to do with, what can have to do with genetics or DNA because of the organ that's being transplanted, but then it's transferred to the recipient as information. Your children's genes reflect only their potential, not their destiny. It's up to you to provide the environment that allows them to develop to their highest potential. Okay, so we're going to go to German New Medicine. I'm going to go back to the slide for a minute and pause for a second to see if anyone has any questions or comments so far. I like this quote because a lot of people, especially older people that are my clients, like let's say over 55, 60 years old, they'll come in, I hear this all the time, oh, I have diabetes because my mom and my grandma did. I have heart disease or high blood pressure because all the men in my family did. You know, they're worried about dying at age 50 because both of their parents died by age 50. So this is definitely where we believe our destiny is tied to our parents and grandparents instead of the belief that we control our destiny. There is nothing pre-wired in us that says that we can't be different than our parents as far as health and how old we live and all that stuff. In fact, the opposite is true, is if your grandmother lived to be 93 and your great-grandmother lived to be 98, aren't you probably going through life and saying, oh, all the women in my family live a long time, so I'm going to live to 100. Then you're more likely to live to 100 just because your belief is that you will. So that's, to me, also very interesting because a lot of times we buy into these stories of, you know, how long we're going to live tied to our family members or what condition they died from. In fact, on life insurance applications, that's one thing they ask you is how old were your parents and what they die of. You know, they're actuarially basing your life insurance rates on these probabilities, but it's because it's our belief, not because it's, you know, maybe accurate because of belief, but it's because we can control it. Okay, there's no comments or questions, so I'm going to move on to German New Medicine. So German New Medicine is one of my favorite, most extensive theories, and there's lots of information online for free. I'll show you a reference towards the end of the website I would recommend going to, but there's tons of information. So I'm going to read some of this, and I'm going to share some of his basic principles. This is probably, well, basically a whole day of the emotional intensive in October because we get into the very specific physical conditions and the emotional underlying cause, and I'll give you some examples of that in this section. So in the spirit of the Germanic or German New Medicine, we offer a word of warning. Dr. Hammer's language and his approach to medicine, disease, and the causes of disease may be something of a shock to those of us who are accustomed to modern Western medicine as it has been practiced for the last 50 years. That there is a connection between the psyche and disease is neither a new discovery nor is it Dr. Hammer's discovery. To quote Dr. Hammer, Through the millennia, humanity has more or less consciously known that all diseases ultimately have a psychic origin, and it became a scientific asset firmly anchored in the inheritance of universal knowledge. It is only modern medicine that has turned our animated beings into a bag full of chemical formulas. That sounds very similar to one of Bruce Lipton's quotes. He says, I want to guide you to an understanding of diseases free of fear and panic. 20 years ago, Dr. Hammer, a German doctor with his own practice in Rome, Italy, received a call in the middle of the night. His 17-year-old son had been shot while on holiday in the Mediterranean. 3 months later, Dirk died, and shortly after, Dr. Hammer, and his wife, by the way, who had been healthy all his life, but who was utterly devastated by this catastrophe, found he had testicular cancer. His wife was diagnosed with breast cancer in the same period of time. Rather suspicious about this coincidence, he set about doing research on the personal histories of cancer patients to see whether they had suffered some shock, distress, or trauma before their illness. In time, after extensive research of thousands of patients, 10,000 to be exact, for the first round of published research, Dr. Hammer was finally able to conclude that disease is only brought about by a shock for which we are totally unprepared. This last point is very important. If we can in any way be prepared for the shocking event, we will not become ill. This would be like you breaking up with someone or expecting someone to break up with you versus them doing it. You had no idea. In fact, Dr. Hammer does not like to say cancer. Rather, it is a special biological response to an unusual situation, and when the shock situation is resolved, the body sets about returning to normality. This is a very simplified account, of course. His books and lectures explain in detail the complete process. Dr. Hammer believes very strongly that the present methods of dealing with cancer are barbarous, cruel, and completely unnecessary. This opinion does not make him many friends. There's a quote by Alan Levine, MD, the majority of cancer patients die because of chemotherapy, not because of the cancer itself. The German New Medicine is a set of findings and principles that solidly base the nature of disease on universal biological principles and on the interaction between the three levels that make up the organism, the psyche, the brain, and the organ. In German New Medicine, diseases have a biological meaning and are not mistakes of nature. In fact, we can now categorize most of the diseases known in medicine in pairs of events. These pairs are actually programs of nature relating psychological and biological events. The programs are designed by nature to either help the individual to cope or as a selection mechanism to serve the group. I see someone's hand up, and if you'll hold your question until the end of the section, I'll take all the questions and comments at one time, so just make a note to yourself so you don't forget what it is. After 20 years of research and therapy with over 31,000 patients, Dr. Hammer finally established firmly, logically, and empirically how biological conflict shock results in a cold, cancerous, or necrotic phase, and how, if the conflict is resolved, the cancerous or necrotic process is reversed to repair the damage and return the individual to health. To date, Dr. Hammer has interviewed over 100,000 people with many other conditions other than cancer, and he's mapped those out as well. He says, I finally had to ask myself whether our understanding and concept of disease had not been entirely wrong because of our ignorance of the biological purpose of disease. He believes that disease has a purpose. We'll get into that in a minute. All diseases start with a cold phase. Activity of the parasympathetic nervous system predominates. The shock is a constant preoccupation, like of the mind. We keep thinking about it, like the breakup or the cheating or someone died in a car wreck or whatever. Nights seem long because we're not sleeping. Extremities are cold, and meanwhile the organ lesion extends. With the brainstem, which is the old brain controller of the endodermal organs, the tumor is growing. If and when there's a conflict resolution, the process will be reversed naturally. The HH is what he calls the lesion in the brain begins to heal, as does the organ. All physicians know that healing is accompanied by edema. The edema that develops around the focus ring in the brain, which I'll show you a picture of in a minute, becomes visible on x-rays or CTs and is usually misdiagnosed as a brain tumor. Dr. Hammer has firmly established that brain tumors do not exist in the traditional sense. Also called brain tumors are edematous lesions at Hammerherds, the edema remaining until healing of the tissue, after which the edema is reabsorbed and final healing is complete. The edematous nodes in the brain are concentrations of glia or neuroglia used to repair the brain and neural tissue, not only in the brain, but also in many tissues. When healing is complete after the healing crisis, the edematous node is pressed out, a diuretic phase eliminates excess liquid from the organism, and normal health is reestablished. So let me try to find the picture of the lesion in the brain. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. I'll tell you a story about that for me personally. The warm phase is the healing stage of disease. Now, this is the second part. So you think of the person who's cold, busy brain, can't sleep, wired and tired, all that stuff. And then the warm phase is considered the healing phase, like recovery, like the condition or the conflict has been resolved. So when we get the healing stage of disease, we usually identify this as the infectious disease. During this stage, the transformations of the first stage are reversed. Cancers are broken down or encapsulated depending on whether or not the microbes needed for caseating the tumor are available to the organism. Necrosis or ulcers are filled up again. The filling of necrosis or ulcers also tends to be misdiagnosed as accelerated, highly malignant growth. Nothing is further from the truth, affirms Dr. Hammer, after several thousand successful cases of healing and restoration of health for terminally ill patients. I'll show you a chart to help explain this there in a minute, because I know this is a little technical. Okay, in this chart, let me try to use my mouse here so you understand what's happening. Hold on. Okay, so you see this right here. This looks like kind of a normal sine wave. And he has like weird terminology, but this DHS, he named after his son Dirk, this is what he calls the conflict, like the moment of conflict. So let's say you walk in on someone cheating on you. At that moment, this normal, what he calls normal vagatonia, and this normal rhythm of, you know, being parasympathetic, sympathetic, parasympathetic, sympathetic, is not doing that anymore, because you're you're thrown into survival mode. So right here, you go into what's called conflict course or conflict active phase, active disease phase, and this is where actually cancer grows. This is where tumor mass grows, because the person's in this kind of fight or flight. So let's say, I keep using the story just because it's so common, but let's say the wife is a stay-at-home mom. She doesn't have a career. She gave up everything for her husband. She's taking care of the kids, and she walks in her husband, and he's been cheating on her. I mean, not only is there this emotional, probably sadness and conflict, especially if she's in love with her husband, but there's also this, well, where's she going to live? Who's going to pay the bills? Is she going to keep the house? What about the kids' private school? You know, what's going to happen to blah, 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 all the material things and the property, and is she going to go back to work? Is she going to have to work even though her kids are 2 and 4 years old? So this is what's called conflict resolution. Sometimes when someone has a conflict here in the DHS, this conflict can go on for 20 years. I mean, if this resolution was in 6 months, that would be a miracle, especially with 2 young children, because isn't there some conflict or some ongoing issue, like possibly every time she sees her husband with this woman? Like, let's say they get divorced and he marries the other woman, and they have joint custody of the kids. This is how these conflicts can go on and on and on. Or let's say there's an inheritance battle. You know, this would be an unexpected shock if you thought your dad had a will and everything was all very set up and organized. You find out dad left without a will, and the new wife is claiming she gets everything, and that never gets resolved, and you don't get anything out of that, and there's this, you know, 20-year resentment against your dad's third wife and the fact that you thought you were going to get some inheritance and you didn't. All of these are good examples of the DHS, but this period of conflict course or conflict mass is what's important, because one of Hammer's principles that he says is if this conflict goes on for 20 years, then the resolution could take 20 years, and that's not good. Because in this conflict course, besides being cold and anxious and busy brain and not sleeping, insomnia, kind of low thyroid symptoms of, you know, stuff like that, then when there is a conflict resolution, which is represented here with CL, then we go into what he calls this healing phase or vagatonia. During vagatonia is the chronic fatigue. the fibromyalgia, the depression. This is when we can't get out of bed. This is when all this 20 years of fight or flight collapses, and it could be one single event. And a lot of times it's what you wouldn't think. Like, it can be the day or week you got remarried, which would be your resolution. It could be when you got that new job. Anything that's a resolution that's healing this conflict over here in this conflict phase on the first part of the graph has to have a resolution, unless someone goes into death as fight or flight, which is possible. But you don't want these things to run this 20-year course, because then you're looking at this 20-year cycle of healing. I'll show you something that kind of makes this more complicated in a minute. Not that this isn't complicated enough, but it's important to understand when I'm dealing with someone as a client, what phase is someone in, and you can usually tell from their symptoms if they're in this phase of cancer. Is actually, by the way, not ever diagnosed in the conflict phase. It's usually diagnosed in the healing phase, and that's kind of also kind of contradictory to everyone's beliefs, because they're already healing, and that's usually when the surgery and chemo and all the other stuff starts. I might come back to this if you guys have questions, but that's a basic principle. Observing the diseases of the being touchy. Observing the diseases of the different germ layers separately, Dr. Hammer established that there was obviously a biological meaning. He realized that diseases were not meaningless mistakes of nature that should be fought, but meaningful events that serve to restore equilibrium, plus tell us something. If you look at just the conditions based on his theories, you learn a lot about a person without them telling you anything, and it's about creating balance and also in supporting the person. I'll give you some examples at the end. Biological conflict shocks exist throughout the animal kingdom, but acquire special meaning for human beings. The conflicts of the endoderm, the first and most primitive of the dermic layers, come from the basic functions of survival, food, and reproduction. If an animal experiences a conflict shock, it usually has something to do with a plain fact. It can be that a morsel of food is too big to swallow, or that there's an obstruction in the intestine, or that there's a life or procreative threatening injury. The types of tumors that develop often increase the ability of the organism to deal with a specific crisis within a given time frame. If the crisis remains unresolved, the individual often dies as a result of the transformation brought about by the growth, like increased hormonal release, increased digestive activity, or increased strength of a tissue. If the crisis is resolved, healing sets in, and the tissue or organ is often less stronger than it was before. I wanted to say something about this right here so you understand what he's talking about. Like an Addison's disease, or something where you have a hyperthyroidism, like Hashimoto's or Graves' disease or Addison's disease. You're basically getting an increased hormonal release because it's dealing with this crisis that remains unresolved. So either the crisis is going to be resolved because the person's going to make some change in their life, or they can actually die from the increased hormonal release that's never resolved. And so that's what he's referring to. So either it's resolved because the person moves or changes jobs or changes spouses or gets over whatever happened to them 20 years ago, or they die of the actual problem because the underlying issue has not been resolved. So this is pretty cool, and I want to explain this. See this round thing where the arrow is, this round, it looks like a bullseye kind of. This is what he figured out. Now, when he was, I don't know exactly how many people he had interviewed at this time, but there was a period of time where basically Hammer had a theory, and he had a pretty good research behind it with as many people as he had interviewed in his free time in oncology wards. But it was still just a theory because he had no scientific proof. And then it just so happens that a few series of events happened where he was actually able to map these lesions, these round bullseye things in the brain, and then he went back and started doing these regularly, and then he could actually map the cancers that also correlated with the emotional conflicts. And so at first it was a theory, and he was just mapping emotions and unexpected events tied to a location of cancer in the body. But over time, this went a step further, and he was actually able to, with a CAT scan, identify lesions in the brain that also map to the emotion and also map to the tumor in the body. So he progressed his research, and this is where he felt that his theories were proven, even though the scientific communities in many countries have not accepted this yet. But I had a CAT scan done when I learned Dr. Hammer's work, and I sent it to Isadora Laker in Canada, who's like the North American expert in this subject. And it was interesting because when she looked at my scan, she not only saw these dark black lesions, but she saw the kind of, well, there's none on this one, but they're more kind of gray or white, like they look like they faded. And those are actually resolved conflicts. So resolved ones kind of show up. Well, there's kind of a big pattern. If you see this kind of bigger pattern around the smaller bullseye, it appears to be a larger circular pattern that's more whitish gray, and that looks like a big conflict that was resolved, but there's still this small one kind of in the same general area of the brain, and this could actually be a picture of what he calls a hanging healing. But anyway, in interpreting the CAT scan, you know, she could go through and very systematically and accurately say every condition that, you know, that there had been, like, you know, lupus, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, GERD, you know, she just went like boom, 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 boom without having like any health history whatsoever. And I thought, well, that's really weird, you know, that she could be that precise by looking at these lesions in the brain. It's because she knew this worked so well. Then she saw a pattern like is on the screen, but in a different part of the body, this dark black circle. And I only had one because by this time that I took Hammer's classes, I had resolved my health issues already. So I didn't have any actually at the time of this, except I was dealing with some carbon monoxide stuff, which was not emotionally based. But anyway, she sees this lesion and she says, well, what do you have neck pain on the right side? And I was like, no. And she goes, you don't have any right-sided neck pain? And I said, no. And she goes, well, you're about to. I was like, what? And she goes, something you feel stupid about, and it's recent. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I kind of just thought, okay, whatever. And, you know, I just kind of thought, well, that's the last thing I need is her to tell me I'm going to have neck pain. And she goes, don't worry, just figure out what you feel stupid about, and it'll go away. And less than a week later, that I woke up with the neck pain. It was the kind when you wake up and you feel like you slept wrong or you have a crick in your neck, but it was really, really painful. And I started thinking about when I had had the CAT scan done, and that week I had learned something really bad about my ex-husband, and I remember that I was beating myself up thinking, why did I marry him? I was so stupid for marrying him. Why did I do that? And what I realized was that process of just saying, I don't normally say I'm stupid, but I was really saying I was stupid about that situation. And she was right. It had created right neck pain. Now, let's say she hadn't just told me that. Let's just say I didn't know Hammer's work to know that right neck pain was going to mean feeling stupid. Then I could have had right neck pain for 5 years until I made the connection between the right neck pain and being intelligently challenged, or saying I felt stupid about that situation. Or let's say, you know, how many of us say we feel stupid about a decision we made, or that was stupid, or we were told we were stupid as kids. I mean, that's definitely right neck pain, upper back pain, and stuff like that. So we have to think about that, even little things like that, little thought processes, those little things that are subconscious that we're not considering are connected to our physical symptoms. And so that's just my story, but it was a big aha moment for me. For humans, these same conflicts are mediated by language and symbol systems. Conflicts of swallowing, as in I can't accept this, I can't swallow it, of inability to obtain sustenance, of uncontrollable anger, of loss of territory, a layoff at work, dismissal, of separation from a child or partner, etc. All conflicts which have their natural analogies, but, sorry, let me say that again. All conflicts which have their natural, I can't even say that word, analogies, but mediated by man's symbolic meaning system, are transposed into human terms. Biological conflict shock is not a complex Freudian abstraction. It is a real-life conflict that is very acute, traumatic, and usually isolating, not easy to discuss or mull over with others. As well, the conflict catches us unaware, without any time to prepare ourselves. Sometimes even a few seconds would avoid the formation of the Hammerherd, the lesion in the brain, and the unleashing of the organic program, as for example, the expected death of a loved one. So again, when we expect someone to die because they have an illness or cancer, it's different than when we get the phone call that we thought they were fine and they died, either because of an illness or because of a car wreck or something like that. Typically, it's a life-threatening or fear-inducing news that causes this kind of shock. Hence, the sadly self-fulfilling aspect of a cancer diagnosis. The patient goes to the doctor with a set of symptoms and ends up with a prognosis of cancer. The patient instantly develops another lesion in the brain as a consequence of the fear of death. This normally starts out as a carcinoma of the lung. The second cancer, the first one leading to the diagnosis and the second one resulting from it, is interpreted as a metastasis. If the first cancer was already in remission and therefore accompanied by the typical brain node swelling misdiagnosed as a brain tumor, the patient is given a limited life expectancy and subjected to different surgical and chemical interventions. Each one of the interventions also has the potential of producing other shocks and of adding to the burden. It's like a second, third, fourth diagnosis. The location of a cancer is a great example. In fact, brain tumors as such do not exist. Based on Dr. Hammer, brain cells cannot multiply. Only the glia does, which is the connective tissue of the brain, to generate repair. Metastases do not exist either. There are cancers and cancer-equivalent developments obeying the same rule, all as associations of lesions in the brain with their corresponding organ developments. There is, in fact, no mechanism for cancer cells to travel from one part of the body to another, nor any way of explaining how one cancer in one tissue learns to mutate and produce the exact correct, histologically different development appropriate to another tissue. As every oncologist knows, each organ, tissue, layer, or cell group shows very specific types of growth, necrosis, or ulcerations because they are histologically quite distinct. The traveling cell theory would not be able to explain the precise changes needed to account for each separate incident. Like a squamous cell is different than like a carcinoma, but they're saying that one metastasized or traveled to the other location. That's what Dr. Hammer is pointing out. In oncology, there's no way for one type of cancer to mutate into a different type of cancer and no travel mechanism because there's never been cancer diagnosed or identified in the bloodstream. So how did it get from the brain to the lungs, or from the breast to the kidneys, or from the breast to the lungs, or whatever? There's no travel mechanism, nor have they ever identified one. When we look back, we see that traditional medical practice does not correctly recognize a single disease. The healing phase, like the grippy or the flu, in the cold diseases was either overlooked or misdiagnosed as a separate disease, while the first phase in the so-called warm disease was usually overlooked or misdiagnosed as a completely separate disease, like meaning the healing phase versus the active conflict phase. Patients with cold diseases present with cold skin and cold extremities, they are in protracted stress. They lose weight, have difficulty falling asleep, and have sleep disorders. For examples, we have cancer, MS, angina pectoris, neurodermatitis, diabetes, and mental and mood disorders, etc. The warm diseases, especially those of, I don't know how to say that word, nature, were defined as rheumatic, infectious, and allergic. So if someone has chronic allergies, they would be in the healing phase, but in a hanging healing. We'll talk about allergies in a minute. If they have rheumatism, which is like rheumatoid arthritis, that would be another example of a hanging healing. But it says like the diabetes, mental and mood disorders would be active conflict that is unresolved. Now we have to conclude that this was not correct. These cold and warm diseases were not individual diseases, but actually one of the two phases of one illness. Moreover, the cold phase is always the first and the warm is always the second. The person basically goes cold when they're in fight or flight mode. That's what that's saying. After emotional acceptance, the body begins healing and swell. So there's one of his theories is there will always be edema with the healing phase of the conflict. After emotional acceptance is the person has come to terms with it. There's been forgiveness. It's not what's keeping them up all night that they're thinking about it anymore. Microbes are not the harbingers of the symptoms, but rather the optimizers of the healing phase. The brain directs all microbes. The immune system traditionally imagines a sort of army in the body fighting malignant cancer cells and malignant microbes in a great battle does not exist in this sense. Following instructions from the brain, the pathogenic microbes become benign, apathogenic microbes and retreat into a part of the organism where they are no bother. They can be recalled only in the healing phase and sent to and reactivated only in the specific organs. Possessed of our antibacterial hygienic thinking, we have tried to stamp out these part-time workers of our organism. We have pushed TB back, but at the cost of preventing breast and intestinal tumors from being castiated by the little souring rods in the healing phase, thus precluding the consequent tumor destruction. It has helped surgery and oncology, but is wrong biologically and medically. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about this. So Hamer's theory is in the healing phase, all of the microbes become active. The Lyme disease stuff, the bacterial stuff, the fungal stuff, the viral stuff, to eat at the tumors and the ulcerations and the bad stuff that basically grew while the person's in fight or flight. So the person's running around in fight or flight for 20 years. They got all kinds of bad stuff developing in their body. They're not really dealing with infection because the body is too cold. There's no fever. It's just basically, I wouldn't say a breeding ground as much as the development of some bad stuff, okay? So here comes along the healing or resolution, and the body sends signals for the fungus and the candida and the bacteria and stuff to go to the parts of the body where there needs to be cleanup and repair, okay? So they're like Pac-Men. They're meant to go clean stuff up. But what happens is, because people have been on chronic steroids, corticosteroids, and antibiotics, is they don't have the natural cleanup ability that they had they not fought all that stuff off and eradicated it. So that's like one big problem, especially with antibiotics, is if someone takes antibiotics all the time and they've cut out the, or basically destroyed the friendly flora in the gut where these microbes can come from, then there's not the little Pac-Men to clean up stuff when the cleanup is needed. Also, I have a lot of people who have like basically chronic parasite issues, chronic Lyme disease, chronic bacterial issues, and in Hamer's theory, this person's stuck in healing phase. They're a hanging healing basically. So it's in that point, I guess the solution isn't to just keep doing candida cleanses the rest of your life or parasite cleanses the rest of your life. The real solution is finding out what the hanging healing is and why you're stuck there. Because if the microbes stay around for too long, then it's a sign that you're in a hanging healing. But you also have to go back to what I said earlier, is how long were you in fight or flight or in survival mode to begin with? Because remember, there's a trade-off there between how long you let yourself be in that phase compared to the healing phase, which is, when these microbes are super active. The DHS, which is that moment of shock, embodies the acute dramatic conflict shock that caught us on the wrong foot, as well as the contents of the conflict that in turn determine the location of the lesion in the brain, and also the location of the cancerous tumor or necrosis in the organ. However, even more can happen in the moment of that DHS, the moment of conflict. In the moment of the conflict, tracks are laid on which the train of events rolls again and again in the aftermath. The event or circumstances that existed at the moment of the conflict become like a set of tracks replaying by association some of the physical elements of the conflict again and again. And an allergist professor once put it in a very informal way. If you suffer a DHS, which is a conflict with a biological conflict, and a cow happens to be passing, you'll develop an allergy to cows. But if you're nibbling on an orange, then you'll develop an allergy to oranges. So this is why allergies are so tough. I actually personally think that resolving allergies is harder than resolving cancer. Because with cancer, it's usually more recent. It's something you can definitely ask the right questions and get to what the conflict is. It's actually not that hard to resolve. But allergies are tough, because if this was a childhood thing and you don't remember the cow was crossing the path, or you were nibbling on an orange when you found out your cat got run over by a car or something, then you may never put those two and two together. You could have actually developed an allergy to cats or oranges had that been what the issue was. And so this is why the older allergies are hard sometimes to identify, because you don't remember what was going on in the background at the time. And a conflict isn't always someone cheating or death. It can be your pet frog died, you came home and there he was dead in the tank. It could be something that happened, you know, to someone else, but let's say it's your best friend and it was very traumatic for you because, you know, this kept playing over and over and over, which created a fear in you. Let's say you had, you know, a friend in school that something happened to, but she's your best friend, and you're reliving it over and over and over, and it kind of puts you in fear of the same circumstances happening to you. It may have been a secondary, and like it didn't happen to you, but it became a shock to you. I know this happened to me in high school. I was in a super bad car wreck, and my best friend got a phone call and got from San Antonio to Houston in like 2 hours. The whole time, driving like over 100 miles an hour, being in fight or flight, being really afraid because I didn't know if I was going to live. So she had her own moment, even though she wasn't in my car wreck. But she had her own moment of this unexpected event and phone call. That's what's so hard to identify, because it can be secondary. Sometimes for little kids, seeing inappropriate age stuff on TV, like a really bad horror movie, can be a conflict because they don't understand that, or things that are just, you know, many age inappropriate things can cause issues in the psyche related to these emotional conflicts. The Spanish have coined a term for German New Medicine. They call it La Medicina Sagrada, or the sacred medicine. This poetic name encompasses the enormous and breathtaking significance encapsulated in the fifth law, which is the disease is not a meaningless error of nature or biology, but a special program created by nature over millions of years of evolution to allow organisms to override everyday functioning and to deal with particular emergency situations. They are wonderful programs that, if understood correctly, provide the individual and the group, meaning like a family, with a way to deal with out-of-the-ordinary circumstances. This is a picture of his chart, which is now, like I said, encompassing many conditions besides cancer. There's a book and a chart, and I have both of these. They're incredibly wonderful. They're not cheap, but they map out everything in the brain and everything with the psyche and the type of conflict and all that stuff. So there's just a picture of them. These are on the website. I'll show you as a reference. A few examples, and these are real life stories, okay? Bone cancer is a healing stage of bone necrosis that accompanies many self-evaluation conflicts. During the cell reduction phase, or osteolysis, there's a bone loss and loss of structural stability. When the conflict is resolved, anemia prevents overactivity, reducing the chances of bone breakage. In the recalcification stage, usually misdiagnosed as bone cancer, the persistent anemia, the pains of the periosteum, and the leukemic stage that sets in are all served to practically immobilize the body until the healing is complete and comes to a stop. Without treatment, so-called bone cancer stops naturally with a complete regrowth and a bone stronger than before. It is thus that the post-conflict resolution stage gives the organism a much improved chance for survival, while the pre-resolution stage weakens the organism and improves the chance of the group or the pack. Nature takes loss of self-worth conflicts very seriously. This is a very common conflict. Bone cancer, not necessarily so common, but arthritis and other bone conditions, very common. Here's just a few of his conflicts with pictures up here of lesions of the brain. So breast cancer, glandular breast cancer, is nest or worry conflict. So this would be a woman who worries a lot, and nest would be her family, her children, stuff like that. Colon cancer, indigestible morsel. This is some indigestible issue they cannot let go of. Lung cancer is death or fright conflict. This would be that secondary diagnosis when someone's been diagnosed with cancer. This can also be some other death or fright conflict, like related to fear of being killed or murdered or something like that. Kidney cancer, abandonment conflict. Kidney cancer can be other things than abandonment, but that's just one example. Prostate cancer can be male sexual conflict. This could be related to like losing a partner, divorce, a cheating wife, a cheating girlfriend, something like that. Intraductal breast cancer is specifically a separation conflict. That's definitely a different type of cancer than glandular breast cancer. So this could be the husband that left them. And you see these little spots in the brain. This is kind of generally where in the brain you would find the lesion in a CAT scan. Cervical cancer is a female sexual conflict. This would be like the male prostate cancer. I've had a few cases of cervical cancer since the whole HPV scare has come out, and each one has been tied to, well, at least in my experience, the ones that happened were a breakup or cheating episode. Ovarian cancer or testicular cancer would be a profound loss conflict. These were the two cancers that Dr. Hammer and his wife experienced after their son Dirk was murdered by a prince of Saudi Arabia. And then bone cancer is a self-evaluation conflict. This is when someone maybe had something happen to them where they didn't feel good enough, like they lost, maybe they got fired from their job, or a person divorced them and then went on to marry someone else, and they took it as, maybe they weren't good enough. See, this goes back to the perception of what someone believes if someone leaves them. If they thought, oh, well, that's their problem, then nothing has to happen or come up. But most people don't take it that way, and they internalize it to be what was wrong with me. Allergies. In the moment of the DHS or the conflict, both men and animals are unconsciously aware of the circumstances surrounding that DHS. These accompanying circumstances later create so-called allergies. That's why people, like let's say seasonal stuff. Seasonal stuff can be explained as, were they outside when the pollen was in the air? Did the conflict happen when there was a high mold count? Were they eating a sandwich which might have had bread, wheat, cheese, all that stuff? Okay, so varicose veins and arthritis. Arthritis is usually self-evaluation because it's like bone cancer, maybe to a lesser degree. Varicose veins is similar in that varicose veins is generally a person who's a doormat kind of, or doesn't stand up to people and gets kind of run over by everybody else, or like a martyr, self-sacrificing, not getting their own needs met. So if you think about varicose veins and arthritis, I put these on the PowerPoint because they're like two of my favorite examples of how biologically our bodies are actually trying to help us if we only understood that. So if we need to be stronger and our bodies are trying to biologically make us stronger by having thicker veins and thicker joints so we can actually stand up for ourselves better, if you can visualize that, thicker veins and thicker joints, especially in the legs and hips, it's meant to keep us upright, to keep us standing, it's to make us stronger. But we don't realize that, and so we think they're a health problem. Well, they are a symptom, but biologically our body is actually trying to do something for us because we're not doing it for ourselves. I put down epidemics because this is also something that people ask me often is, how do you explain epidemics? Epidemics are always tied to fear, or fear of separation, fear of the unknown, stuff like that. And so there's some examples, like now the big thing is Zika virus, but if you go back into periods of time where there was swine flu virus, aviary flu virus, the Ebola thing, all of these, if you go back, there was these big scares in the media that this was coming to the U.S. It's here, it's now, it's going to be here, and they even have all these crazy TV shows, and the media just goes way too crazy, which is creating fear and panic in people that let that create fear in them. Right now, the big fear thing is, with the politics and somewhat with the economy. But we have to kind of watch that because, well, we don't have to kind of watch it. We need to watch it because if we live in that fear mode of what's going to happen, then it's not that we're contracting some exotic thing from somewhere. it's that our fear is driving our body process to be a host of symptoms that look like an epidemic. And even like in chickenpox, it's usually like kindergartners and first graders that have, you know, they're new in school, that they have this weird environment, they have new teachers, they're separated from their moms many times for the first time, and you know, they've done studies on kids that get chickenpox and, you know, how they related to school, and had they been in daycare, and had they been in I guess, I don't know, not pre-daycare, but, you know, the thing that you go like pre-kindergarten, you know, did they do pre-K? And, you know, this also happens sometimes in even second and third graders when a favorite teacher leaves on maternity leave and they get a substitute teacher. So they've tracked all this. They've seen that swine flu affected, you know, parts of Mexico when the drug lords and the, I mean, not that that hasn't changed, but there's been period of times where, you know, in like Monterey and certain cities where they're just shooting up everybody and people are dying and everyone's scared for their lives. I don't know if it's actually better now, but when you go into these different situations like aviary flu in China, they never broke out in the U.S. They never became an issue here because our culture and our environment was not going through the same thing as those countries of origin, like in Africa or China or Mexico. If you go back and look at the history of what I'm talking about, you'll see this pattern. These epidemics are not actually epidemics because there's nothing behind them. It's all emotional and it's fear-based. Vision and hearing is also two of my favorite examples because hearing is a little bit easier to describe, but you know, a lot of times we kind of laugh at certain people and we say, well, they have selective hearing, you know, because maybe they get tired of being nagged or they get tired of being told what to do or they get tired of whatever. Well, selective hearing can turn into permanent hearing loss over time. And in fact, I've seen a pattern with this with autistic kids and hearing conflicts. Sometimes it's because of stuff that they heard over and over, they got tired of hearing, but sometimes it's, you know, bad stuff they heard, like, you know, verbal abuse, emotional abuse, and stuff like that. And when the mom who's pregnant hears things she didn't want to hear, there is a pattern that's related to autism. Vision is very similar. People can have cataracts and glaucoma and farsightedness and nearsightedness based on things they saw that they didn't want to see, or things they wish they saw that they couldn't see, like someone leaving or someone coming or something that happened. You know, like if you think about it, if someone didn't see something coming that they thought they should have, then to make their intuition stronger, their vision may go cloudy or blurry, which is supposed to help their intuition so they kind of see it coming next time better. I mean, I hope that's making sense, but it's I see it all the time in scans in people's consultations, is that their hearing loss is because of, you know, a hearing conflict, and that not being able to hear is actually a protective mechanism for them, just like the vision is. If they keep seeing something over and over at home that they don't want to see and they're trying to ignore, their vision will help them do that. Their vision will not be clear so they don't have to see it the same. And then my favorite example is bladder incontinence, because this one is so easy to understand when you think about dogs. You know, dogs, what do? They go around and pee everywhere, and they mark their territory, and they mark their yard, the boundaries of the yard, and everywhere else another dog peed, and everything they smell, and they want everyone to know they've been there. Well, you know, this is kind of funny, but men do the same thing in their yards or their farms or whatever. They love to pee outside because it's marking their space. Well, women do too, and it's incontinence. So if their territory is threatened by their mother-in-law or a stepchild or some other, you know, family moving in with them, or some situation where their territory and their space is not defined any longer, or they're not like basically the alpha female anymore, then they'll start dribbling and they'll start having little bladder things when they cough or sneeze or laugh or whatever, and all that is a sign that their territory has been threatened. So this is true of animals, domestic pets as well, whether it's bladder or fecal incontinence. It's usually when a new puppy or new kitty or new family member comes into the space, and then they feel challenged. And so they're just doing what animals have been doing in nature forever. This is a a CD that's from Ilsedora's website, which is up at the top of the screen, newmedicine.ca. It's a Canadian website, and I highly recommend it. It's a really great CD. I think it's about 45 minutes long, and she goes through a quick presentation of common ailments like I've just described in the healing and the conflict resolution phase, and talks about why you have them. I think it's like very much worth the money. So questions to ponder at this time having to do with German New Medicine is, do you think most people have only one active conflict at a time, or do they have more? I mean, how many people do you think only have one? This is not realistic to think people only have had one conflict in their whole life. Can a new conflict be created by a cancer diagnosis? Yes, we already talked about that. How many people actually resolve a past conflict completely, and how long does it take? That depends. It depends on the conflict, and it depends on their mindset. So this is an example of someone who has had multiple conflicts, which is like everybody. So he talked about tracks, and tracks, like that's a train track related to an allergy. But you see that there's one, active conflict up here where the arrow is pointing down where it says DHS. And then there's another one down here at track A, and another one at track B. And then this other one on A is tracking back again because it's a healing, hanging healing. And then we have track D that is another one. And so what you get is these crazy patterns of going in and out of healing phase versus conflict phase, and that's why people can have hot and cold symptoms, be hot and cold, have symptoms in both categories of wanting to sleep too much and insomnia, and all at the same time, because no one is dealing with the pure chart in here. Well, not most people. Sometimes one really stands out, and it's nice because you can work with that so much easier. But sometimes you have to do a lot of digging to get to all these different tracks to find out what the connections are that got them there emotionally. So the reference that I recommend that you go to, you can look up Dr. Hammer or German New Medicine all over the internet. There's tons of resources. And the reference for the material I used tonight is from newmedicine.ca. Ilse is an absolutely wonderful instructor on new medicine. She teaches the course twice a year via internet, and then the last section of the course is live in Canada. But you don't have to do all of them, but I recommend at least the webinar portions because they're just incredible. And I think it's like when I took it, it was one a month. So 1 week in a month, you're listening to her via webinar like tonight. And also I want to tell one last story, and then I'm going to go to comments and questions. Is most of you were probably at some point aware that Fidel Castro was supposed to die of cancer. I mean, he was terminal, he was stage 4, they were doing all the last rites, and his brother was already basically named the predecessor, and he, because he was a ruler of a country, had access to pretty much any medicine he wanted in pretty much any country, and no one could save him, especially through traditional cancer treatment. And it was Hammer's German New Medicine that actually found his solution. He's still alive and fine to this day, but it was all because of German New Medicine, and he was so impressed by the theories and principles that he made it a requirement for all medical practitioners, nurses, doctors, anyone in healthcare in Cuba to learn German New Medicine. And if they'd already gotten out of medical school, they had to go back to take the courses and principles to learn it. And it's also very popular right now in Spain and Mexico, much more popular than it is in the U.S. So if you've never heard of this, it's growing. It's just taking some time because it's against big pharma, and the American Cancer Study, or cancer, is the second largest money-making industry in the world, second to oil. So if that tells you anything. All right. Before we get into the last section, which is why people don't heal, let's see, Joanna. Hey, Joanna. Uh-oh. Oh, it says, Joanna, that you did not put in a PIN number, so I can't unmute you because there's no PIN number. So if you can either go back on the audio and put in a PIN number, or just type your question in the chat, or in the question box, I'll get it and I'll read it out loud. So hopefully you can hear me and know what I mean. But if you don't put in a PIN number, then I can't unmute you because it shows that you're kind of self-muted there. Okay, if anyone else has a comment or question related to anything so far, I'll cover it. If not, I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to go to the last section, which is why people don't heal, and then I'll ask for questions one last time before 9 o'clock. So hopefully we can get through this pretty quick now. Okay, so I'm going to keep going. Carolyn Mace has many outstanding books and videos, including a free 8-part YouTube on the subject, Why People Don't Heal. And these are a lot of things that I basically have written down from my personal notes from watching her videos and taking her courses, and some of them live in Houston. Illness, what she says is illness becomes part of a person's identity and included in their introduction or soon after meeting them. What that means is, you know, you meet someone and within 5 seconds, and sometimes even before they even say their name, they tell you they're a breast cancer survivor, or they had a stroke, or they had a heart attack, or they have a pacemaker. When someone introduces their medical issues in their introduction, it's definitely part of their identity. Or if within 30 minutes or an hour of meeting someone, they've disclosed their whole health history to you, like a normal conversation at a party or something like that, then you know that this is a problem because it is part of their identity. Illness offers financial benefits such as disability, Social Security benefits, and workers' compensation income without having to work. This is sometimes a side benefit of an illness. Illness attracts attention they weren't getting before from family, church friends, coworkers, neighbors, etc. Children and outsiders visit more often, so this could also be a side benefit that as long as they're ill, they have this extra attention. Illness gets them out of doing things they didn't want to do or don't want to do, like taking care of a family member, doing a job they hate, having sex with their partner, etc. So illness can be a way of, you know, basically choosing what they want to do or not want to do based on their symptoms. Illness can be a way to manipulate or control others. They get to choose when things are done, what they eat or cook, what family can do, and when. Illness is also a way to get things done by others they normally would not do or nor want to do. So, you know, let's say, you know, a person wants their daughter to go with them Christmas shopping because, well, what if something happens to them and they have this illness and the daughter doesn't even like Christmas shopping? It's a way to get people to do those things because are you going to say no if your mother has stage 3 some type of cancer? No, you're not. So that's what I mean by manipulating and controlling others. Illness is a way to get pity, and no one is going to challenge the victim card. Example, a rape victim or breast cancer patient. And Carolyn Mace in her video gives a great example of this where, you know, you have a person who's late for work, or they, let's say a person just late for work. They're chronically late for work, but every time they get, you know, acknowledged for being late, they pull out the victim card while they're still dealing with the you know, death of their daughter, which was 8 years ago, or their, you know, whatever's going on with them, but that story and their depression or their illness, and you're going to back down because no one's going to challenge the victim card and saying, oh, well, hey, it's been 8 years, get over it. And so they're going to win because they're always going to pull out that card, especially when things are not going the way they want. Illness can be a source of power, like in disease support groups, rallies, and nonprofits. And what's interesting there is that, you know, it's like almost like the sickest one or the person who has the most symptoms or the most severity is like the hero. It's like they get the most attention or they get to be the spokesperson for the group or whatever. And so it's almost like being rewarded for how sick you are. Illness has other benefits like free food and prepared dinners from outsiders, free days off work, free transportation, and other free stuff. And so all of these are reasons why some people don't want to get well unconsciously, because if they did, they wouldn't get the attention, the free stuff, the time off work, the control, the manipulation. I had one young person in Colorado when I was there. We were doing this emotional intensive class, and she realized through Carolyn Mace's work that it was all of her eating, digestive issues, and severe allergies that she always got to pick what restaurant that everyone went to, whether it was friends, family, boyfriend, and his family. She was like severely gluten intolerant. She had some other issues, basically like colitis, and she always decided what everyone wanted to eat, and no one could question that because it was like, oh, well, you're not going to accommodate Amber, you know. So then it's like, oh, you're a horrible person because she always is going to decide this for the rest of from now on. This is a Carolyn Mays quote: "We are not meant to stay wounded. We are supposed to move through our tragedies and challenges and to help each other move through the many painful episodes of our lives. By remaining stuck in the power of our wounds, we block our own transformation. We overlook the greater gifts inherent in our wounds, the strength to overcome them, and the lessons that we are meant to receive through them. Wounds are the means through which we enter the hearts of other people. They are meant to teach us to become compassionate and wise." This is some other things from Carolyn. "Healing is unattractive because we have become addicted to the power of the wound, and there is no desire to lose power. We create our own disease so we can uncreate our own disease or create our health. The soul always knows what to do to heal itself. The challenge is to silence the mind." I like that one a lot. Okay, so personal questions. Observe how much of you is using wounds for power or control, any excuses, any victim dialogue. So think about that for a minute with whatever you might be dealing with, and think of how this is a setup and how we are setting it up. We're setting it up for ourselves. In what way do you interfere with your cure? Are you blocking your cure because of your belief system or because of desire, power, manipulation, control, attention? What would your world look like if you were healthy? What does it look like to bond out of strength and love versus sickness? Relationships connected with wounds or desire for power and manipulation. So, I mean, I've even seen cases where literally, like how the old story of someone getting pregnant to try to hold on to somebody, that's a huge manipulation. But think about it from if someone, kind of knew their partner was out of their reach, like emotionally they're already disconnected. And if you can just understand this, like unconsciously developing a serious illness to hold on to that person, knowing that they wouldn't leave you if you had stage 4 cancer. So, I mean, this can be big stuff. It's not like just little stuff. Is there any financial gain to the disease, disability, or workers' comp? Is there any gain to it? Are you lazy? Have you done all you can to get better, or would you rather get paid to stay at home? This is a big thing with workers' comp and disability. Have you ever been rewarded for being sick in the past, like with lots of attention, or candy, or sweets, or dessert? You may be stuck and cannot break the pattern of sickness due to imprinting. Has there been an emotional trauma? Emotional trauma can prevent cure, especially if you can't identify it. Has a disease become part of your view of yourself? Explain. Do you identify with it? Do you tell total strangers or people at the bank or people at your daughter's party or your granddaughter's softball game what your medical condition is, and if you are, why are you doing that? Carolyn says, just let go. Let go of how you thought your life should be and embrace a life that is trying to work its way into your consciousness. Do you believe it's possible to totally cure the disease? The biggest step in healing you must believe before you can receive. Can you see clearly life without the disease? Describe it. This will be a homework assignment. This is sometimes a problem with chronic disease where people have had, let's say, fibromyalgia for so long that they don't remember normal. So it's kind of hard to visualize normal when you don't even remember it. This is especially true when people have had issues since childhood. They don't really even know what their life would be without that condition. Does the disease prevent you from working? Do you hate your job or career? Was your disease a way to get you out of that job or career? Does the disease limit you from living? Do you hate your life? Refer to opening your intuitive channels for guidance. So this is like something from another workshop. I mean, it goes into more detail on the emotional intensive. Does your disease prevent you from being socially active? Do you fear social rejection? Have you done all you can to get better? Can you control your impulses and addictions, like modifying your foods, taking time to pamper yourself and exercise, giving up coffee and cigarettes, etc.? I think all of these are good thought-provoking questions, because this is how we kind of get stuck in, excuses, really. I get every excuse in the world on that last one, where people, say they don't like water, they don't like vegetables, they don't do this, they can't do that. It's a choice, and we have to be able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We have to be able to, even if we have to fake it until we make it, we have to create a picture of health, of what that's going to look like, what our goal is. Do you really want your body to heal itself, or do you wish to just know your disease? Do you ever intellectualize your condition? Your body can get better. Heal yourself if your verbal mind does not interfere. Do you fear or fight change? Describe what changes you fear or fight. Can you accept life without this disease and see the beauty of life? Yes, even your life. Acceptance can provoke cure. Have you learned the lessons this disease has provided for you? Journal your experience and what you have learned, and give it up to God and show appreciation for the experience and what it has taught you. Compassion, humility, understanding, or patience. And express that you got the lesson and no longer needed the ailment. I've said this many times, that I know that a lot of the issues I used to have was what got me into this field. I would have never been in this field, trust me, had I not had the health issues I had. And I'm thankful for that experience. So there's probably some reason. I'll tell you a story right here of, this is a client story, but I have this is actually 3 different people right now that I can say this is true of the same exact story, women with very severe chronic hip problems. I'm not saying this is true of all women with hip problems. I just happen to be dealing with it in several cases right now. And in the first one that came out was a person who was having a very tough marriage, a lot of stuff going on, and when I did a scan on her, it showed this hip problem related to a sexual conflict. And she had not told me this, but it came out that her husband was very rough with sex, like very physical, not in a beating kind of way or something, but not what she liked. And it turned into her body gave her a hip problem, a severe hip problem, to where she literally cannot have sex. She cannot put her legs in such a situation that she can have sex, because she'll just go into pieces. And this is, though, affecting the whole rest of her life, driving a car, sitting on a couch, sitting in a chair, doing everything, just because of this fear, or really, I would say, fear and dislike of sex with her husband. And she won't leave her husband. And so now we're in this quandary of this hanging healing, because her body's trying to tell her something, but she's not, well, she has a message, she's already been told, but she's not taking action. So she can either change her perception of the situation with her husband, or she can leave her husband, but her body is trying to protect her. That's what this whole tonight is about, this understanding biologically why you might have a particular problem. So Carolyn Mace is a medical intuitive author. Many of you guys have heard of her. She's been around like forever, like Louise Hay. I love going to her talks. I mean, every time I listen to her, I get a little tidbit of something that is super useful in understanding the body and the psyche, and how she sees energy patterns. I highly recommend that you go to YouTube and watch the 8-part, I think it's about an hour, but 45 minutes, 8-part of Why People Don't Heal, because she has some really incredible stories in that presentation that really stand out to me, and I tell them all the time to my clients. This is the book, Why People Don't Heal and How They Can. I think this is a very good book to give to people that might be stuck in their process, or stuck in their victimhood, or stuck in their woundology, which is all this language about their condition. So I am doing an emotional intensive. I'm going to go to questions last here in a minute, so we can stay within the 2 hours. I am teaching the emotional intensive. I've been teaching this class for about 5 years now. The next one's going to be in Houston. It's going to be October 19th to 23rd, and I'm teaching it with Carol Culver, who's the person who's been co-teaching all the Hannah classes with me for the last 2 years. She's my friend, my apprentice. She's taken all the classes in Boulder. She's been teaching the work, living Hannah's work, and she's also a New Vision practitioner. The course will include how to identify your own underlying emotional issues specifically, that are affecting your physical health with easy-to-learn techniques for releasing them. Each participant will get a personalized new vision assessment focusing on their emotional health for the course. Hannah's hands-on techniques will be taught and practiced, and demos of her most popular spiritual clearing techniques will be covered also. Basically, everything that we can't do in a webinar is going to be taught in this class. We can't do a hypnosis or timeline therapy. Even though hypnosis can be done by Skype or whatever, timeline therapy I don't think really can. And so it's everything that we can't do by webinar that's going to be in this live 5-day class. Some of the things taught are going to be Emotion Code by Bradley Nelson, Matrix Energetics, all of Dr. Hammer's, well, not all of his work, that's really a 5-week thing, but the highlights with the specific conditions, neurolinguistic programming, Hannah's crystal laser clearing method for emotions, timeline therapy, which is a regression hypnosis technique. I put this quote in, to heal the past, you have to time travel with the genuine intention of seeking and breaking repetitious patterns and gaining insights into what you need to learn in this lifetime. This is a really great quote that refers to timeline therapy. It's going back in time to get those little tidbits of information that we just can't remember, where we need that extra help that hypnosis offers. Some of the hands-on techniques that will be covered is the tailbone adjustment, the hip alignment, the releasing old traumas, blood clot clearing, the aura fluff, the dropped organ procedure, and the whiplash adjustment. And then some of the spiritual techniques that will be covered are the 7-candle ceremony, the energy entity clearing of a room or house, and releasing karmic patterns. We'll be practicing, you'll learn the technique, then you'll practice on each other, and this, it says, hopefully will result in the release of stuck emotions that can be affecting many areas of your life, including your physical health. Each participant will get the personalized assessment, which I've already said, and this is equivalent to having several live sessions with me, but going into the deep work that I don't always do with clients live. If you've taken the class previously anywhere, I've taught this class in New York, Colorado, Texas, is that it? And the cost is $100 to audit the class, and that's really for the cost of the room and snacks and stuff like that. To register for the emotional intensive, you can call Carol, and the number's on the screen, which I'll leave up here for a minute, or email her. And for private appointments, you can call me on my cell phone or send an email to gwen@gfia.net. And so just one thing I put in a recent newsletter too is I'm getting so many emails and been busy with appointments lately. I don't really get to them until, except for 2 or 3 times a week. So if I don't respond right away, it's just because it's some weeks just getting to emails twice a week. But send me the email and we will follow up with you, and someone named Morgan King may respond. The secret of medicine is to distract the patient while nature heals itself, which is a Voltaire quote that I also love. I'm going to leave this up on the screen, and I'm going to check to see what your questions are on anything that we've covered tonight or about the class or anything like that. Michael says he'd love to have a copy of those last bullet point questions. That is a good idea, Michael. And hi, by the way, I will copy those and send them out with an email with a reminder that this presentation tonight has been uploaded or will be uploaded after tonight to my new YouTube channel, which has all of the 2-hour webinars I've done this year. And I'll post the bullet point questions with that little newsletter. I'll try to send it out by early next week. Stephanie has a question. I have a quick question in relation to the hip problem. Does a certain hip, right or left, come from a different issue? Yes, they do. I'm going to tell you the quick answer, but I go into this a lot in emotional intensive. If you're a right-handed person, then your left hip represents issues with your mom or children, and your right hip is everyone else. So if you're a right-handed person, left-sided issues has to do, this is a Hammer theory, has to do with mom and children issues. Your mom, a mom-like figure, or your biological children, or stepchildren, or perceived children. Right side is husband, co-workers, friends, whoever else would be on the right side issue. So these women I'm talking about, they can have issues on both sides, but generally it's the right-sided issue when it has to do with partner. Marilla's asking, will the course be available on Skype? You know, I don't know that, Marilla, because I don't know how we would do that because these are hands-on. What I might be able to do, but I haven't worked this out, is have a videographer video the sessions. But what you would lose with that is the practice, because you know how things are in practical terms. If you don't practice, then you may not learn the technique. So it's super useful, I think, to see the technique, you do the technique, and have someone do the technique on you. By that time, you've experienced it 3 times, and a lot of times it sticks that way. So if we can video some of it and upload it to YouTube, I might do that just for the sake of just making it available on YouTube. I'll have to see if we can work that out live. So hopefully some people will register, because we need enough registrations by September 1st to make the class happen. We need kind of a big room that's costing me $600 a day to accommodate the class, because we need room for massage tables and people to do timeline therapy and walking around and breaks and, you know, then classroom setting and all that stuff. So there's some expense and a lot of time on our part. 5 days is a lot of days to do a class, but it's a lot of great information and practical, especially if you want to get into the deep work yourself. All right, so with my speed talking, I actually am finished 2 minutes early, which is a miracle. And that's only because you guys didn't have a ton of questions tonight. I hope that this was super useful. And, you know, the point of this tonight was really to get to a point that we could say, okay, let's consider that our issues are emotional. Depending on feedback after this one, I might still do a part 2 that has to do with more specific conditions related to emotional, you know, specific physical ailments related to emotional symptoms, emotional causes. I'll have to decide that, but I will, and I'll let you know. So sometime around September 1st, if there's going to be a part 2 in emotions, I'll definitely make that announcement. You're welcome, Michael. And Stephanie says, if you happen to have any information on the emotions that manifest in ovarian cyst, endometriosis, I would love to have that. I cannot find anything Googling. So ovarian cyst and endometriosis would be something of anything with hormones is usually related to the family dynamic. So let's say something in estrogen dominance. It's like still, like if you think of a protection mechanism, like endometriosis is a thickening of the uterus lining, which anything thickening is always some protective mechanism. So if you think about your life history and go back to emotional issues that needed to make you a stronger alpha person, like in either a defense or protective way, or in a relationship way, or a family of origin way. So we're thinking about, 2 possibilities here with, I could go into this more detail and, and like this would be maybe an hour appointment of questions, but basically if you think of 2 possibilities, one is making you stronger to protect you. The other one is if there was some underlying unconscious fear of getting pregnant, like a way to protect from procreation because of a fear of getting pregnant or a fear of something related to that. So I would look at both angles, because endometriosis and ovarian cyst has to do with both of those. Also looking at what other alphas are in your family. Did you have a very strong mother type, or was she a very weak mother type? Or was there a very dominating sister or coworker, something like that, especially going back to when all this stuff started, like about what age this stuff started. Like, did a stepmom step into the picture? It's something about female to female. It's usually not female to male when it comes to this stuff. Also, was there issue with a partner, especially stuff like cheating, separation, stuff like that. But anything with the female system has to do with relationships and motherhood. Morella's asking about pituitary issues. I'd have to look up pituitary issues. I don't see that much related to, well, I just don't see a ton of pituitary issues. I do see them causing, secondary thyroid issues. But pituitary is a control mechanism. So I would go, Marla, to my question would be, is it hypopituitary or is it hyperpituitary? And then that kind of tells me if it's a conflict phase or resolution phase. So if it's hypopituitaryism, then it would be healing phase problems or hanging healing. If it's hyperpituitary, then it would be active conflict, like other fight or flight stuff going on. So the main question there, it's not right or left side of the body, it would definitely be related to, oh, by the way, Stephanie, on the ovarian cyst, that would also give you a clue if it's right or left ovary where the cysts were. That should give you a clue on who it's related to, the issue. Back to the pituitary, though. Okay, so again, hypo means healing phase. Hyper means survival phase, meaning active conflict. It's not resolved yet. And then pituitary is a master control gland. So it controls all the complex functions in the body. So then, you know, having to do with survival, a hyperpituitary would make you faster. Like, let's say if there was some perception you weren't fast enough before, like something got past you because you weren't fast enough. If it's hypopituitary, it's slowing you down because you were too fast. So biologically, there's always a process going on with the endocrine system of being too fast in the past, and it made you miss something, overlook something, something didn't get done, or it's to speed you up because you were too slow in the past. Had you been faster, you would have got the partner, the job, the baby, or something. So you always have to, on any health issue, the first question is to ask, when did it start? When did the issue start? When did the symptoms start? Then track back generally 30 days up to 1 year, and then go, what was going on in my life at that time, especially an unexpected event. Remember, he says it has to be an unexpected event. If it was a planned or expected event, it really doesn't count. So a job change that you planned would not be it. It has to be something you were not thinking about. Okay, so I hope that helps. You guys can, of course, schedule something if you want to go into a lengthy session about you. And then if you have any other thoughts or if you have a desire to take the October class, please let us know by September 1st because we're trying to get that head count. And thanks for attending tonight. I know it's a big time commitment. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.